Members, we have a quorum. I call this meeting to order. Welcome to the panel on Constitutional Affairs. Item 1, information papers issued since the last meeting. The Secretariat has issued the relevant papers to members. Items for discussion at the next meeting. That's the next item. Well, meanwhile, let me first invite the administration to come in. We have from the administration Mr. Matthew Cheung, Chief Secretary for Administration, Mr. Andy Chan, Under Secretary for Constitutional and Mainland Affairs, Ms. Mabel Lee, Deputy Commissioner, Labour Administration, Mr. Godfrey Can, Senior Assistant Solicitor General, Ms. Kathy Lee, Assistant Secretary, and also Mr. Billy Wu, Principal Assistant Secretary for Security, Mr. Andrew Zhang, Principal Assistant Secretary for Security, and Mr. Judy Zhong, PAS, Constitution and Mainland Affairs. So at the next meeting, which is 2:30 p.m. Monday on the 20th of May 2019, the administration has proposed to discuss the following items. 1. Preliminary proposal for the delineation of constituencies for the 2020 Electoral election, and item 2, a briefing by Chairman of the EOC. So item 3, the third review of the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region by the Working Group on the Universal Periodic Review of the United Nations Human Rights Council. We're also going to receive deputations today. We have 24 deputations and individuals attending this session. You will find the attendance list in the annex. So, without further ado, would the Secretariat staff please invite the deputations to come in.
May
I welcome deputations and individuals to our meeting. This is a panel on constitutional affairs. First of all, if need be, you can use the earpiece in front of you. Channel 0 is floor, Channel 1 is Cantonese, Channel 2 is English, Channel 3 is Putonghua. In due course, I'm going to invite all of you to speak according to the order on the attendance list. Each will be given 3 minutes to speak. And for those attending the meeting, please be reminded that the timer will go off when the time limit of 3 minutes is reached. As a reminder, for those who haven't provided a written submission to us after the meeting, you can give us a written submission and please pass it to the Electoral Secretariat. May I also remind members of the public expressing views here at the meeting that you are not protected or exempted under the Legislative Council Powers and Privileges Ordinance. The same applies to your written submissions. And may I remind deputations and individuals to note the various security measures in the matters to note for members of the public attending or observing meetings in the electoral complex. This notice sets out the various security measures. It is also circulated to all of you, and there is also a copy on the table, and members of the public in the public gallery can also get a copy of the notice from the security staff here. Before I invite the deputations to speak, let me first invite Mr. Matthew Cheung, Chief Secretary for Administration, to walk us through the administration's paper. And then I'll give the floor to deputations. After that, I will invite CS to give a summary of response, and then I'll give the floor to members. So, Mr. Zhang. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, members, and thank you, deputations and individuals, for coming to our meeting today. Very briefly, I'd like to walk members through the paper.
At the end of March, the UN held a meeting to review the human rights situation in China, and Hong Kong was also part of the discussion. So, China and the Human Rights Council, according to requirements, China needs to provide a 22-page country report, and 3 pages were related to the Hong Kong SAR, and it was provided by the Hong Kong SAR government. So the report covered the legislative framework to protect human rights, and since the last occasion, the different human rights measures, including setting up a Children's Council, a minorities steering group, and also our policies on targeting human trafficking and the safeguarding of domestic employees. So in November, we had looked into human rights, and I mentioned in March the UN Council had adopted the 3rd report. So the central government and Hong Kong SAR government places a lot of importance to this report, and our deputations and also part of the Hong Kong SAR government were part of the delegation. So in the UN Council meeting, there were 110 country members speaking, and 6 member countries had put forward suggestions, and the Hong Kong delegation had also made a response, and there were some controversial political issues, and our delegation had clarified the situation. So the working group had made some recommendations regarding China's human rights, and that included China, Hong Kong, and Macau. There were 4 related to Hong Kong. The SAR government, after careful consideration, had presented its position, and the details can be referred to Annex F in our paper. On 15th of March UN Council meeting, they had examined the report, and we stated our Hong Kong's position on the rule of law and our economic situations. The SAR government will uphold these principles, and the SAR will comply with the basic law, one country, 2 systems, and our human rights are protected by the basic law and other human rights legislation. So Hong Kong's judicial independence is enshrined in the basic law. The Court of Final Appeal can deal with final appeal cases and can also appoint judges from other common law jurisdictions. So our jurisprudence ranks number 1 in Asia. So, Chairman, as you know, Hong Kong has a free economy. We have tourism and logistics. We also are one of the safest countries in the world. The American Heritage Fund has rated Hong Kong for the last 20 years as the freest economic institution. So while promoting economic activity, the SAR government also places a lot of resources on medical, education, welfare, poverty alleviation, and the improvement of ethnic minorities' welfare. We want to ensure our workers, including foreign domestic helpers, we want to create a equal, harmonious society. These are the values of our society, and that also promotes Hong Kong in its future development. The UNHRC has adopted the 3rd report, and after hearing from deputations, we can give a more detailed response. Okay, thank you, Chief Secretary. So now we have arranged for the deputations and individuals. They have 3 minutes. So once again, before you speak, I remind you that according to Rule 87 of the Rules of Procedure, the Chairman can rule disruptive behavior and order the people offending this rule to leave our meeting. So the details are available in our notice to the public. So to ensure that the meeting can proceed smoothly, I can have the unruly people escorted out of the venue without warning. So now we'll invite deputations. The first is Mr. Simon Henderson.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Simon Henderson, and I'm spokesperson for the Hong Kong UPR Coalition. The coalition was founded in 2017 to help facilitate civil society for the UPR, work collaboratively with government, LegCo and the international community. We continue with those goals. The coalition has been at the centre of engagement for the UPR, holding over 200 meetings, workshops, several submissions to the UN, LegCo and other bodies, developing 24 fact sheets and much more. We have met with various representatives from CMAB, including Secretary Nip. When I last spoke to the panel on the 30th of April 2018, I advised that the third cycle would be different. I'm pleased to speak here following 12 countries using the UPR for the first time to specifically raise Hong Kong. This includes 6 recommendations. The amount of attention reflects growing concern from the international community about the human rights environment in Hong Kong. It is a signal that the government needs to act. The coalition believes in constructive engagement rather than just criticism, which is why we have the following proposals in response to the UPR. Firstly, a cross-sector UPR advisory group with civil society and government representatives to monitor and implement the recommendations. Secondly, a database of human rights treaty body and UPR recommendations to improve the accountability of responses to UN human rights mechanisms. And thirdly, reforms to improve treaty body and UPR consultation methods, including making all draft reports available for public consultation. On the 2nd of April, we provided a proposed terms of reference for the advisory group to the government, while on the 9th of April, a draft version of the human rights database was provided. We call on the administration to genuinely engage with civil society to help implement these proposals. There will be actions required to implement the UPR recommendations. For example, Croatia's recommendation on legislating domestically to implement the Convention on the Rights of the Child. A first step the administration could take would be supporting a legislative gaps analysis to determine which laws require amendment to be consistent with the Convention. Each LegCo member has a crucial role to play in the UPR, translating recommendations into policies and laws. LegCo members can support a human rights database of human rights treaty body and UPR recommendations, help drive accountability for implementation of the recommendations, and seek briefing from the coalition and other CSOs. However, the coalition has some concerns with the administration's paper, which we wish to bring to the panel's attention. The coalition is disappointed in and rejects the statement in Annex F from the administration's paper that the 3 recommendations from Australia, France and Philippines have, quote, already been implemented. If the recommendations were already implemented, foreign governments would not have made them, nor would civil society have advocated so hard. Additionally, Annex F states that the recommendations from Canada and Croatia are, quote, being implemented. This suggests that the government believes no action is required. Such a response indicates a lack of interest to develop interactive, collaborative and innovative policy and legislative initiatives, as the Chief Executive called for in a policy address last year. The UPR is an opportunity and test for the government to show whether they're dedicated to being Asia's world city and can work constructively with civil society and the international community. The coalition stands ready to work with this panel. LegCo members.
Time's up. Thank you. 下一位係呂國平。
Next is Ms. Yang Wai-wai. In the 2018 China UPR, I'm very happy to have seen that the sexual identity has been on the agenda for discussion, and we also see that there have been some steps forward towards the rights of different legislation against discrimination against people with different sexual identities. Then, if that, the Macau representatives in the UN had also said that in the UN they made some suggestions regarding discrimination against sexual minorities. Now, if you look at Taiwan, there are also laws against discrimination. So compared to China, Macau and Taiwan, China and Hong Kong are the most backward regarding protection against sexual minorities. Some 70% of surveyed people favor legislations. And last Thursday, a lot of countries have shown images of the Event Horizon Telescope. That's nothing new. Hong Kong is also a black hole. And it's called the Constitutional and Mainland Affairs Bureau. This bureau is operating in a vacuum. And after you go through the bureau, time is swallowed because there is no timetable for its work deadlines. Now, training for sensitivity against sexual minorities, aside the workshops for teachers, social workers, has not been mentioned, has not been implemented. There is no advance. There were calls for studies of overseas legislation against sexual minorities. The government pledged that there would be consultation. Now that has been postponed again and again. Starting from 2015, the platform for discussion has disappeared. The Hong Kong government has even forsaken consultation, and we can see that things have deteriorated. So we call for legislation against discrimination against sexual minorities. We also want the government to provide some policy measures against the removal of discrimination. I also want to comment on the UPR and other conventions, including the human rights conventions. So we need a database for the progress of these policies. We also need the interim report, and we also need to report back to the UN regarding the progress in these areas. Next, Ms. Lo Yut-meng. Thank you, Chairman. I was born in Hong Kong, grew up in Hong Kong, and I'm an intersex person. So I had a painful childhood. I suffered mentally and physically, and I cannot return to my birth sex. And after many operations, my health has deteriorated. So the intersex, our sexual organs at birth, and are different from the mainstream. This difference doesn't mean that we are sick, doesn't mean that we need medication. So even in the case we need medication, we still need approval from the affected persons. But the current medical system, under the misdiagnosis, we are labeled as handicapped and with a serious deficiency. So in our childhood, we might have had to undergo forced operations, and it leads to unnecessary suffering. So these sexual, these procedures that alter our sex leads to a lot of emotional trauma. In 2015, the UN had this sexual assignment operation without the approval of the affected person has been deemed as torture, and this cruelty should not continue. There should be compensation to the affected people. But after 4 years, we don't see the Hong Kong government doing anything or making any progress. So we are happy to see that the Hong Kong government has adopted the UPR report and is willing to implement the Convention of the Child. So the Hong Kong government still requires, the Hong Kong government needs to fulfill its obligations under the United Nations Convention of the Child. So once again, we seriously urge the Hong Kong government to legislate to stop cruelty against forced sexual assignment operations. They need to assist affected children and families. It does not require social consensus. We need to protect the safety of children, and we also urge legislators to pay attention to the protection of the children's rights. Thank you. Okay, next.
Mr. Choi Yu-chang from SOCO. Thank you, Chairman. I have 2 points. First, About the government's response to UPR, NXF, like CS mentioned, the government prepared a response. If you read the response, you will see that the government is singing his own praises. The government says that everything has been done. I think the government is cheating the international community. Well, in terms of the concerns expressed by other state members on Hong Kong, I think many concerns are valid. For example, there should be equal rights to participate in politics. The administration cited the basic law and just harped the old tune. What about universal suffrage? I think the international community is concerned. Also about the freedom of assembly and of expression. Again, this is also a concern because of the recent developments in Hong Kong. According to the SAR government, there is legal protection in Hong Kong. Now, about the CRC, Convention on the Rights of the Child, Croatia has recommended that local legislation should be enacted. I think this is similar to the CCPR. The government, in fact, is not enacting local legislation to directly give effect to the Convention on the Rights of the Child in Hong Kong. I think the CS should give a clear response. Don't deceive us or the international community. Now, I want to talk about what the government's follow-up action should be based on the recommendations put forward by the working group. Nothing has been said in the report. Well, in fact, the United Nations Human Rights Council, UNHRC, does stipulate that follow-up action be taken on the recommendations made in the report. For example, there should be a commission or committee set at the ministerial level to follow up on other state members' recommendations. This information should be uploaded onto the internet for access by the public and by civic society so that we can check the government, especially the SAR government, on its follow-up action. Now, during the 5-year reporting period, in the interim, namely after 2.5 years, there should be an interim report submitted to the UNHRC. I'd like the CSOA to explain as well in due course how the government is going to follow up on the recommendations. Thank you. Next, Mr. Leung Kwok Hong. Chairman, I think Mr. Choi Yu-cheng's speech is just a waste of breath. Well, because the CS is wearing a different hat. He is the deputy of the Chinese delegation instead of the chief secretary for administration of the SAR government. So he just does the biddings of the mainland government. If you talk about mainland law, well, I think it is really advanced because it just copies from the international conventions and nothing else. Have you learned anything in Hong Kong? Have you learned the statement in 1984 by George Orwell? If 2 + 2 = 5 is right, then other problems will naturally be solved. At the moment, you have 2 + 2 = 5. I can't help but think about Li Zhaosheng. He used to be the Minister of Foreign Affairs, and he is now he's now on exile. And we have the Secretary for Security and also, well, I can see the different government officials just being shadow ministers of the mainland, Carrie Lam and Teresa Chang as well. Because President Xi praised Carrie Lam for not shunning away from troubles. And she does his best in finding challenges for herself. Well, she didn't mention that in the election manifesto. Let me just remind the chief executive not to be adamant because of President Xi's praises. And also, Mr. Matthew Cheung, you don't shun doing evil deeds and you have no shame in telling lies. The whole administration tells lies. You disqualify electoral members, and also the National Anthem Bill, the XRL saga. There have been so many controversies. You just relied on the NPC's interpretation of the Basic Law. And Carrie Lam already said that universal suffrage is such a controversial issue. She is not taking on this challenge. What about Article 23 of the Basic Law? In 2003, people took to the street, 500,000 of them. And also umbrella movement, that's what it is all about, universal suffrage. You shun the controversial issues, and then you promise to enact legislation on Article 23 and also for the Fugitive Offenders Ordinance. Well, if there is no change at all, well, in other words, you are going to send Hong Kong people to the mainland for a trial. And this is something like sending patients to an infected hospital for a surgery. This is not liberty. This is not freedom. This is sending people to away to die. Ms. Kathleen Curtin from Pathfinders.
The Chief Executive of Pathfinders. Our submission today is two-pronged. First, focusing on the rights of foreign domestic workers who fall pregnant, and second, on the children born in Hong Kong to these migrant workers. Pathfinders is an organisation that works to ensure the most vulnerable and unsupported children born in Hong Kong to migrant mothers are protected and respected. Since inception in 2007, Pathfinders has helped over 6,000 vulnerable babies and children and their migrant mothers. For pregnant foreign domestic workers, we urge the Hong Kong SAR government to do more to safeguard and protect the maternity rights under the laws of Hong Kong, namely their right to enjoy maternity leave and the right not to be terminated and discriminated against because they are pregnant. On paper, these rights exist and apply to local employees and migrant workers alike. However, in reality, pregnant migrant workers are all too often unlawfully terminated or forced to resign because neither the worker or their employer knows how to manage the maternity leave, particularly when the worker is required to continue to live in their employee's housing after the baby is born. After termination, the pregnant worker loses access to housing, healthcare, and social welfare. She is left homeless and penniless, a cycle of deprivation that begins even before the child is born. Clarity and guidance to all stakeholders is crucial to ensure lawful, safe, and healthy pregnancies free from harmful treatment for migrant mothers and their unborn babies. This could mean including maternity rights in the standard domestic helper contracts, publishing practical guidance on the rights and responsibilities of all parties involved, relaxing the live-in rule during maternity leave, providing affordable, temporary cover for employers whilst the worker is on leave, or extending the initial maternity leave period to enable pregnant workers to return home to their home countries to give birth. Establishing clear and workable policies is now vital if we are to prevent the escalating problems likely with the proposal to extend maternity leave to 14 weeks and to increase the number of foreign domestic workers in Hong Kong to 600,000 by 2047. For children born in Hong Kong to migrant mothers, they are often unable to enjoy basic rights due to their immigration status, especially in birth registration, education, and access to health. Some children born to migrant mothers do have permanent resident status, but was recently ruled by the Hong Kong the Court of Final Appeal, their rights do not matter when their immigration department decides to remove their mothers from Hong Kong. We therefore urge the Hong Kong SAR government to do more to protect these children, improve policies and guidelines to all government departments and frontline officers on how to deal with migrant children, and the newly created Commission on Children could lead this effort.
時間夠啦，下一位係公民黨嘅伍。
Next, Ms. Hillman from Civic Party. Thank you. First of all, the Civic Party is of the view that the administration is just hiding behind the shield. Well, according to the United States, the governance has deteriorated. That's also the view of the Canadian agency. The Chief Secretary mentioned nothing about these in his report. From different studies, we understand that the Hong Kong residents have had the lowest confidence in one country, two systems. The government is not respecting the UPR mechanism. The government is also not safeguarding the core values and human rights in Hong Kong. In the government's response, the government has omitted the negative reviews made by the foreign think tanks. And in fact, in 2014, the State Council of the CPG published a white paper on the governance and administration of Hong Kong. The freedom or the autonomy of Hong Kong was tightened up, and there were also more conflicts between Hong Kong and mainland. And the Hong Kong government also undermines the human rights in Hong Kong. We believe that we should highly respect the Sino-British Joint Declaration, the Basic Law, and Hong Kong people's freedom is gradually being eroded in terms of freedom of expression, gathering, and the right to take part in elections. And we also have the state organ attacking individuals, and our personal freedom will further be tightened. Now, for the police to issue the notice of no objection for demonstration to take place, the conditions are getting harsher. The government also uses inappropriate force in dispersing crowds during rallies. Some political affiliations at the moment will be phased out because of the society's ordinance. It is rumored that Demosisto, the political party, will be the next. Hong Kong government should abide by international standards and respect people's rights in assembly and also freedom of expression. The candidates in the election should be free to speak and take part in elections. The government invokes society's ordinance to eliminate political organizations. This is not correct. The government should stop. The government should also stop electing legislation on Article 23. There should be proper legal safeguards for people's rights and freedoms. In March 20, well, your time is up. Next, Ms. Zhang Xinying. About Hong Kong government's report to the United Nations, I would say that this exists only in the parallel universe. This is not the real Hong Kong. Well, first of all, it is said that Hong Kong people continue to enjoy freedom of press and freedom of speech, etc., etc., and that there is no intervention on the media, on the news media. However, last October, the mainland authorities already advised Hong Kong government not to allow Hong Kong to become a base of subversion. It was reported by the local media, and then the mainland authority changed stance, and then the media also changed statements. Well, the other point is that the government always says that the relevant issues will be followed up by relevant departments, and then the matter will be left on the back burners. Carrie Lam never said anything about it, and the government has not even promised to safeguard freedom of press and freedom of speech. If we take a look at Annex F, it is said that the ultimate interpretation of the basic law, I mean the right to do that, lies with the NPC, and in exercising the final adjudication rights, the Court of Final Appeal will appropriately invoke such interpretation. So from right to application, what happens in between? The government very cleverly leaves out the point that it should be up to the CFA to seek interpretation by the NPC. The NPC should not take the initiative to interpret the basic law. This is undermining human rights and the basic law. And also about the Australia's recommendation that you should uphold the rights, freedom, and the rule of law embodied in the one country, two systems framework for Hong Kong. You say you accept this recommendation. Does it mean that you will retract from letting NPC interpret the basic law on its own initiative? Anything relating to the freedom of Hong Kong and the freedom of press is any concern about that is unfounded. Well, this is what the Chief Secretary said to the whole world at the UN meeting. Aren't you ashamed? We have no freedom in the media, no freedom in the press at all. Hong Kong government is undermining human rights. Hong Kong government is just like the kidnapper. On the one hand, you face the world and you tell the world that you are not oppressing the people, but in fact you are. Hong Kong still has a civic society. This report is pointless because you continue to tell the world how Hong Kong people's rights are undermined.
Okay, next. Ms. Zhang Fengmei. The government has said that they will be building a framework and have convened the Children's Council. It is not a statutory body. It cannot implement legislation and draft legislation. So I'd like the government to respond. How does it live up to the UN Convention of the Child, especially when it comes to education, medical care, social welfare, and how the children's rights are protected? Now, China has accepted recommendations and will convene an independent human rights commission. Hong Kong should not avoid its responsibility. The Equal Opportunities Commission had been criticized for it not being independent enough and not living up to the Paris Convention. Now, over the years, the EOC has not fought for discrimination against the ethnic minorities, and we have other discrimination ordinances, but not anti-discrimination ordinance for ethnic minorities, and they have not fought for ethnic minorities' rights. So the EOC needs to have independence financially and ensure that its work is done without prejudice. So under a one country, two system, Hong Kong should have an independent human rights body, and I hope that today the government can respond to the call for setting up a human rights body in line with the Paris Convention. Ms. Tan Wing-yan. Thank you, Chairman. So I'll be explaining some of the local jargon in a while. Now, the report says that Hong Kong is safeguarding human rights, but the so-called safeguards only protects a limited number of people. Some people are ignored. So we have juveniles in jail. These were minor misdemeanors, but they lose their dignity, and it seems like the Correctional Services Department are not living up to their principles. They have been depriving people of their human rights. In the last 20 years, we see that the CSD has been torturing its criminals. There have been physical torture, verbal abuse, and even sexual assault. So chicken wings, it means that an elbow to the spine, and we have also attacks on the rib cage and so on. So juvenile criminals are subject to these types of assault. So because our bureaucracy has no mechanism to deal with complaints, and our JP report indicates that we have 21 correctional services, but 9 of them have not received any complaints, and that includes all the juvenile detention facilities. So the juvenile criminals, they are afraid, they don't want to look back, so they would rather suffer in silence rather than complain. And the complaint mechanism is manned by the bureaucracy, so there is no room for their case to be heard. So the government should provide for an avenue where complaints can be heard fairly. So where do we have human dignity? Why do juveniles have to suffer in silence? So we'd like the government and the relevant departments review this so-called complaint mechanism. We need an independent complaint mechanism rather than its self-examined mechanism. We need more transparency to... Next, Ms. Wong Jian. Well, the whole report, I see many different aspects, but do you speak on behalf of the UNHCR? Now, you are a signatory to the Convention against the physically handicapped. So, are the two committees manned by the same staff? Does that mean that Hong Kong does not need to comply with the Convention against the handicapped? So the second issue, Hong Kong looks like a place with the rule of law, but on the medical front, you referred to medical reform. What is that about? The physically handicapped cannot enjoy medical services, or we make a complaint and the situation doesn't change. The government instructs the hospital authority to do its work, or do you adhere to the basic law? Do you ask the hospital authority to comply with the regulations? I don't understand. How are medical affairs related to constitutional affairs? I can tell you, if there are no reforms, then even when you instruct the hospital authority or FEHD, it's all talk, empty talk. The physically handicapped need respect. They need barrier-free access. They need a lot of support and resources, but it's insufficient. A lot of different aspects, such as we don't have hostel facilities for the adult handicapped. So how can you say you live up to the convention? The physically handicapped are humans. Children are humans. The elderly also are humans. So how come you cannot live up to the requirements of the convention? For example, the hearing impaired, they need sign language. There's no training unless teachers in schools have learned sign language. Otherwise, nobody can teach them. The parents don't know what their child is saying. Braille, unless you have a medical report saying that otherwise they don't receive training. Okay, time's up. Next.
Let me thank you for giving us a chance to give a talk and share our views. I am Leanne, a teacher back in the Philippines and a domestic worker here in Hong Kong. I would like to share my views on the live-in rule for domestic workers here in Hong Kong. Mattresses laid on top of counters, washers, and dryers. Blankets spread on floors of kitchens, living rooms, or kids' bedroom. Small unventilated room the exact size of a single bed. The sofa. These are just some examples of living quarters given to some of the domestic workers here in Hong Kong under the live-in rule stated in their contracts, though they sound like decent accommodations to you. Accommodation concern is just one of the problems that arises from the live-in rule. Extensive and very long working hours, sleep deprivation as they could be on call for 24 hours, curfews on their days off, not enough food to last them a whole day of work, privacy issues, and most importantly, abuse. Different kinds of abuse that one has to experience as they don't have their personal space, a space that will separate the work and personal time. Those are the other significant concerns. Some cases of abuse has been discussed publicly and even brought to the court. Abuses that arise in the homes of employers, which is also the workplace of domestic workers. But haven't we realized that these certain cases could have been prevented if they are not required to stay in their employers' homes? That with the live-in rule, we are putting some of their rights at risk, and instead of protecting them, we are exposing them more to situations that will violate their rights, not only as workers, but as humans as well. Some will just probably raise an eyebrow and say, so what? Who cares? They are workers and must follow what their employers told them. But have we realized that they are playing a vital role, not only in the homes of their employers, but to society as a whole? That without them, some of us will be like a person with only one arm. Have we realized that it is now time for the society to treat them more humanely? That we should start giving back to them, to their hard work and contribution, by letting them have their own space and remove the live-in rule. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight, before going to bed, challenge yourselves, even just for a single day. Put yourselves into your domestic workers' shoes. Sleep in that small area you assign them. Give yourselves the same amount of household chores you are giving them for a day. Set the same curfew to yourself and have your privacy invaded in a way that they are experiencing. And most importantly, eat the same food that you give them. After doing those things, tell yourself honestly how you felt being in a domestic worker's shoes. Thank you.
好，下一位係香港職工會聯盟。
Next is Mr. Lam Zhoming from FTU. Thank you, Chairman. First of all, the CS, I have to say this is this report is an embarrassment. Well, first of all, you have bragged about things people that did not ask, and you say that in 2018, Electoral had passed a bill taking workers who were dismissed illegally, and there should be criminal sanctions. So you've only increased the penalty to $72,500, and it will relieve them of criminal liability. But according to the International Convention on Civil Rights and Political Rights, the convention protects that all people can have the freedom to join a union and not be discriminated against. But just adding the penalty to $72,500, can that effectively safeguard the employer not discriminating against the union? And then you go on to state in the report where the ICRPR says that the work should allow the employee to maintain reasonable living standards. And we know that the minimum wage will be increased to $37.5. Is that a reasonable level? Can that allow the worker and his family to maintain a reasonable living standard? Now, item 7 also stipulates reasonable restrictions on rest and work hours, but up till now, the SAR government has not regulated standard working hours and has not made any legislation on this issue. Another issue related to unions and worker rights is the International Labor Organization, Article 98, collective bargaining. So, Mr. Chung, you should be familiar with this convention. The ILO has repeatedly called for Hong Kong, because Hong Kong is a signatory, to live up to Clause 98 of the ILO. But once and again, the government has not made any legislation regarding collective bargaining and has not balanced has not leveled the playing field. So regarding the third UPR, we want to express our dissatisfaction. Next, Ms. Jung Hing Yi. Thank you, Chairman. We are very happy to see that the UPR Canada has suggested that Hong Kong people who participate in government should not receive discriminatory treatment, but in the physically handicapped, in 2008, we had been a signatory to the Convention against the handicap, but CRPD has not been legislated. The Croatian recommendation is that there should be legislation for the United Nations Convention of the Child. So even though Hong Kong has convened a Children's Council, but in this framework, it does not comply with the CRC, and we don't have a elected representative in the council. So from 2017 to 2019, we see that the review is very chaotic in 2017.
Well, there is a review report on mental health, and nothing's been mentioned about the CRPD. That is, the review report was not written on the basis of the principles of the CRPD. And about the rehabilitation program, it entails a review of our system. Well, the government said that the CRPD would form the basis of the review. Rehabilitation, however, seems to encompass everything about the disabled just by a single word. There are other aspects to the lives of a disabled, and in fact it also entails employment and other matters. We hope that the government can give us a clear timetable and a timetable for policy implementation. In fact, recently, 2 major incidents happened. Like in the case of Mr. CHU Hoi-dick, the hearing was held about this person who is autistic, and also the closure of factory for the blind. It shows that our society doesn't give sufficient protection. At a very late stage, the Defense Council discovered that Mr. CHU Hoi-dick is in fact autistic. And this undermines his right to have access to legal protection and make an informed choice. No sufficient support was given to him. Your time is up. Mr. Chen Sang-heng, Justice Centre, Hong Kong.
My name is Nathan Chan, and I'm speaking on behalf of Justice Centre Hong Kong. Justice Centre Hong Kong facilitates the engagement of the Hong Kong UPR Coalition in a universal periodic review process, and is part of the steering committee that guides the process. My colleague Simon Henderson has spoken about this on behalf of the Coalition, and the Coalition's joint submission has been provided to the panel for the meeting today. I wish to draw the panel and the administration's attention to specifically the recommendations made by Croatia, the Philippines and Indonesia during the 3rd cycle of the Universal Periodic Review to discuss children's rights and migrant domestic worker rights. Croatia has recommended that Hong Kong internally legislate to implement the Convention on the Rights of the Child, and this recommendation has been accepted. The CRC came into force in Hong Kong in 1994. However, there remain substantive gaps in Hong Kong's legislative framework. For example, Article 3 of the CRC, which requires consideration of the best interests of the child in all statutory and administrative decision-making, and Article 12 to ensure that views of children are expressed and heard, have yet to be given legal effect. As such, we welcome this acceptance and encourage the administration to work with civil society in implementing this recommendation. The recommendations from the Philippines and Indonesia relate to migrant domestic workers in Hong Kong. We are pleased that the recommendation from the Philippines on enhancing the monitoring of the standard employment contract for migrant domestic workers has been accepted. However, of concern is that Indonesia's recommendation that China, including Hong Kong and Macau, should consider ratifying the International Covenant on the Protection of the Rights of all migrant workers and members of their families was only noted. Justice Centre urges the government to provide details on why the recommendation was not accepted with reference to the specific articles. Forced labour and trafficking exist in Hong Kong. Coming Clean, a report published by Justice Centre in 2016, found that 17% of migrant domestic workers in Hong Kong are subject to forced labour. This is further aggravated by the finding that 1 in 7 migrant domestic workers in Hong Kong have been trafficked into Hong Kong for the purpose of forced labour. Lastly, Justice Centre Hong Kong also expresses its support to the 3 key proposals put forward by the Hong Kong UPR Coalition. We urge the government to establish, firstly, a cross-sector UPR advisory group to monitor and implement the recommendations. Secondly, a human rights database of treaty body and UPR recommendations. And lastly, institutional reforms to the treaty body and UPR consultation processes, including providing in advance reports for civil society consultation. We welcome dialogue with administration and legislative council members on these matters and urge constructive and genuine dialogue with civil society. Thank you.
Next, New Women's, the Association for the Advancement of Feminism. I'm Ao Mei Po. I represent my association. There are 2 parts to our submission. First, about the process of the Universal Periodic Review and the SAR government's position, and also the content of the review. First of all, I'd like the administration to actively accept the world's recommendations, because this UPR is a mechanism allowing dialogue between Hong Kong and the international community based on the UNHRC and the relevant conventions. About the state members' concerns on human rights at public hearings, they could also put forward questions. Through this mechanism, it is hoped that human rights can be improved. In this exercise, quite a lot of countries or state members have expressed concerns about Hong Kong on human rights, different from previous exercises. Some countries made some recommendations. For example, the Indonesian government recommended that we provide protection for migrant workers, and also other countries, Switzerland, US, etc., raising questions about the freedom of press, and also the rule of law and the judicial independence. And about these recommendations and questions, we feel that the Hong Kong SAR government's response is just lukewarm, and very often the government's words are not consistent with its deeds. Under the mechanism, the United Nations actively encourage governments to help public and the civic society engage in the process. This is not just about the UPR. Under other human rights related mechanisms, very often we would only receive the framework put forward by the government, and the framework lacks details. As such, we're unable to put forward our concrete proposals and comments. We were only given the outline, and we were asked to comment on the outline. After some time, the government then told us that the report is ready and it will be submitted to the UN. We hope that before formal submission to the UN, we could also have a role to play and that we could be able to give our comments. Next, Ms. Kanman Kay, Hong Kong Women's Coalition on Equal Opportunities. Well, in the government's report, there is no mentioning of equal rights, gender equal rights. While Hong Kong should abide by the articles under the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW. However, we think the government is not reaching the passing mark. The government has not actively followed up on the recommendations in CEDAW. For example, gender mainstreaming. That's actually the opening statement of CEDAW, and that every state member should observe this. According to the SAR Government, Women's Commission is the high-level committee in relation to that. But according to the third cycle, the government's report, the committee already expressed huge concerns about the Women's Commission because of the unclear positioning and that there are no resources to implement the gender mainstreaming initiatives. However, this government continues to have no shame and reiterate that it is a high-level central mechanism to advance the rights of women. Now, in terms of gender mainstreaming, we like to check the progress. We found that for the Women's Commission, it lacks resources. There is no mechanism. We're not sure what work has been done. It's done in a piecemeal manner. In the Policy Address 2015, the former Chief Executive announced quite adamantly that starting from 2016, all policy bureaus and government departments should implement gender mainstreaming. As of now, how many departments have a gender checklist of gender mainstreaming, and what result has been achieved? The government has been silent on the matter, and I think the government in a moment should give us an answer. The other concern is about reform of sexual offences in Hong Kong. Since 1957, when we enacted legislation for sexual offences, they have by and large remained the same, and we are lagging far behind other common law jurisdictions. These offences are out of date, and we are concerned that victims of these offences cannot have adequate protection. In 2006, the Law Reform Commission published a number of consultation reports to review the non-consensual sexual offences. The government made no response. In 2014, the UN report... I'm sorry, your time is up. Next, Mr. Wong, Demosisto. In the past 2 years, the government continued to use obsolete pieces of colonial legislation to prosecute members of the public. The government disqualified electoral members. Well, as a result, in this report cycle, attention has been drawn. For example, Australia requests that the rule of law and freedom be guaranteed in Hong Kong, and for Canada, there should be right of Hong Kong people to take part in the government without distinction, no screening. The SAR government flew to Geneva in response to the report, but in fact, the government continues to harp the same tune, saying that one country, two systems is an unprecedented success, and that we also need to grasp the opportunities of the Greater Bay Area. Well, in the United Nations meeting, even the government had to promote Greater Bay Area. Isn't it strange? Well, it has always been said that we practice one country, two systems. This is well established and effective. And then Matthew Cheung becomes the human recorder. And again, at the UN meeting, he reiterated the success of one country, two systems. This is actually an answer to the allegation that we now have one country, 1.5 systems only. But all along, the government has been reacting very badly to accusations about human rights issues in Hong Kong. In fact, recently in Hong Kong, it is found that the government published afresh the pamphlets relating to the rights of children, and then instead of using yellow, they used another theme color, and I think this is political screening. I think eventually the even Electral's logo will have to change the color theme, and in fact the Undersecretary Mr. Andy Chan for Constitutional Mainland Constitutional Affairs really squandered a lot of public money in the name of leading a delegation, but in fact was found to be going sightseeing on the Alps. And I think that we should not have any expectation to avoid disappointment. Although Matthew Cheung continued to tell UN delegations that all concerns about human rights issues in Hong Kong are unfounded and it is nothing but a misunderstanding, we will continue to draw international attention. And if Hong Kong government works behind closed doors, there is a price to pay. Matthew Cheung, you cannot pull wool over the eyes of the international community. Next, Ms. Leung Wing Han.
Kelly Leung, and I'm here as a member of public. I'm here to talk about children's rights, particularly child abuse issues in Hong Kong, as well as Hong Kong's obligation to safeguard the best interests of the child. Hong Kong became a signatory of UNCRC 25 years ago. However, today we still don't have a consolidated legal definition of child abuse. The issue of not having a consolidated legal definition becomes problematic when dealing with cases. Even though the Social Welfare Department has revised its procedural guide for handling child abuse cases and produced leaflets, any definitions within are still not recorded in any legislations and hence have no any legal effects. In mid-2018, Hong Kong has finally established its very own Commission of Children. It seems to be a great step. However, ever since it has been set up, has there been any concrete mandates? It's been almost a year, and the Commission has nothing to show for itself and to the public. On Children's Day this year, the Court of Final Appeal handed down a judgment that concerns children's rights in Hong Kong. It was indicated that CRC, I quote, is an unincorporated international convention and on the dualist principle does not give rise to any enforceable rights or obligations. Even though this is a case about immigration issues, it is indicated by the highest courts in Hong Kong recently that CRC is basically not legally enforceable because it is not domesticated. The ineffective and non-comprehensive implementation only provides limited protection to children. Such incorporation further marginalizes groups that require protection and have particular needs, including children with disabilities, children belonging to the LGBTI community, children of migrant workers, and asylum-seeking children. There is so much Hong Kong could do to protect their own children. And how we treat children says a lot about us as a society. They are our future hopes and the pillars of the future society. Frederick Douglass once said, "It is easier to build strong children than to repair broken men. When child abuse happens, the trauma stays forever." I do sincerely hope that the Commission on Children can take the lead to build stronger children for this community for a brighter future in Hong Kong.
好，下一位係香港亞洲家務工工會聯會黃漢良先生。
係各位，我係香港亞洲家務工工會聯會嘅代表黃漢良。
I am Wang Hanliang. The UNHCR, UPR had raised a lot of recommendations, and there were 6 areas related to Hong Kong. And one had was made by Indonesia, where all migrant workers and their families' rights were protected. So whether it's the Hong Kong government or Chinese government, they stated that they would not accept that. So the Hong Kong government report stated that their reason for objection was that the Hong Kong SAR does not allow for migrant workers and their dependents to live in Hong Kong. So, and therefore they objected to that recommendation. But that is only an excuse of the government. In fact, the Hong Kong government has not been willing to safeguard the rights of the 380,000 migrant workers in Hong Kong. So under this scenario, Hong Kong has been notorious for depriving workers' rights. We had Baby Jane incident, their experience, and have been reported by international media, but that is only the tip of the iceberg. In fact, people with similar experience or even worse experience, there are plenty of migrant workers with similar stories. So when we look at the convention, why the government objected to the Indonesian government suggestion is because under the convention, the Hong Kong government has not been able to live up to the requirements, including Article 39, where migrant workers working in Hong Kong can freely choose their living quarters. Now, since 2003, there was an in-house live-in policy where all the migrant workers must reside with their employers. So migrant workers, even if they are being abused or they need to live with their employers, and there is no course for redress. And in Article 43, the convention states that migrant workers need to enjoy civil rights and political rights, including medical rights. But in Hong Kong, we had the Baby Jane incident indicating when their employee-employer relationship ends, they can only legally stay in Hong Kong, even if they have been illegally, their work contract has been illegally terminated. So they will lose their medical benefits and rights in Hong Kong. Okay, time's up. Next, Mr. Hoi-dick. Thank you, Chairman. I'm very honored to have the opportunity to attend the Constitutional Affairs panel. The third review of the working group on the UPR. This has only highlighted our black box approach. So the one country, two systems can be implemented successfully, and he claims that we are in compliance with the one country, two systems, basic law, and so on. I think that's ridiculous. It's a joke. The Civic Party had previously said that the notice of no objection and if you the jurisprudence has achieved the lowest rating in history, and one country, two systems has been criticized. And we have legislators being disqualified. I don't know how to comment on that. Last November, the UN, under pressure from the Chinese government, had circumscribed Hong Kong's autonomy, and we see people being disqualified. So Matthew Cheung and Carrie Lam, they have paved the way for Article 23, and it is not acceptable, Mr. Matthew Cheung. So the letter of no objection requirements are more and more stringent, and we also have the Occupy Central figures being sentenced. I cannot accept the charge of creating a public nuisance because these Occupy Central participants participated in a peaceful, reasonable event. Thank you. Time's up. And last, Mr. Yao Jihang. Thank you, Chairman. I am a research director of Feng Yulan. We are a crisis support group, and I want to talk about the victims of sexual violence. We find that the report had not mentioned anything about sexual violence. Sexual violence is a social phenomenon that needs to be addressed. Starting from 2014, the Social Welfare Department statistics indicate that there are 1,000 reports per year, and the majority of victims are females. So it indicates the matter is very serious, but that's only tip of the iceberg. Recently, we issued a report indicating the cases we studied over the last 10 years. The victims usually wait on average 1.3 years before they report the matter to us for follow-up, and even before they report to police. The victims also wait on average 13 years before they seek assistance, and less than 30% seek help from the police. So we have late reports, and this is very prevalent. It indicates that after sexual violence, they face a lot of difficulties. But in the light of these sexual violence, our government has not done anything, and there has been no mention of that in the recent report. In regards to support against the victims, the government has done nothing. So we have been suggesting that in public hospitals we need to have a 24-hour crisis center to help to give a one-stop service to the victims, so that the victims can receive social welfare, medical, forensic, and also police statement services. So all these are made according to WHO recommendations. And last year, our legislator, Dr. Pierre Chan, also put forward a motion that was endorsed unanimously. But very unfortunately, our government has not lived up to its pledges, and they even announced to the public that they have set aside 1 or 2 rooms in public hospitals for victims. So we don't need a crisis center. But it's ironic that the government later said that in 2017, there were only 4 victims that used these facilities. So this low usage rate, what kind of ridiculous scenario does that indicate? I hope that when this year's report is drafted, they take a good hard look at the problems that victims of sexual violence encounter. So in the short term, we suggest that the government include plans for the Kai Tak Hospital and provide a real one-stop service. Okay, so the deputations and individuals have spoken. So we will invite Mr. Matthew Chung to give us a response. So members who wish to speak can also indicate. So let me read out the Mr. Au Lok Him, Claudia Mo, Fernando Zheng, Lam Chok Teng, Regina Yip, Chen Jiquan, Leung Mei Fen, Hui Jifeng have indicated, and Mr. Jiang Zhongtai have indicated they wish to speak. So, Mr. Zheng, first of all, I have to thank the 21 deputations. I have listened to them very carefully. Because of time constraints, I cannot respond to each question. Now, first of all, there has been some misunderstanding that we went overseas to mislead overseas representatives. That's not the case. We are very practical. For example, we heard that regarding Indonesia's recommendation, we will do whatever is within our reach, but things beyond our reach are out of our hands. We have to take a hard-nosed, practical approach. Now, the physically handicapped problems and the women's problems, well, we have a separate delegation or group to deal with the handicapped, and last year we had conducted consultation and there was a report submitted to the central government, and the central government will report back to the UN. Now on CEDAW there's also a different convention, and we were dealing with human rights. There were also questions about migrant workers. We are concerned about migrant workers' rights. We are streamlining our efforts. If you noted, aside from the Labor Department, I also am in charge of a high-level steering group where we target human trafficking and safeguard migrant workers' rights. We do have a series of suggestions that you can find on the web, on the internet. So aside from inspections, we do have different policies, and we will continue. So the contributions of migrant workers are very significant, and we need to express our gratitude. On the labor front, you see in the past our minimum wage has been improving our workers' rights. We also have paternal leave and maternity leave. We have very clear timetables for maternity, paternity leave, 10, 14 weeks, and paternity leave 3 to 5 days. So even offsetting this has been dealt with, and all these are intimately related to labor rights. So you can look at that from a macro perspective. Regarding children's issues, the CRC, Hong Kong has been signatory for 25 years, and recently we had a very clear determination to, last year we convened a children's council. I'm the chairman as well. We want to focus on education, medical support. We have a whole series of improvements. We work with NGOs and the government, and all of these are practical, down-to-earth work.
小朋友，咁大家要明白咧，咁成個精神咧，嗰啲已經充分反映出喺我哋嗰個政策，亦都喺我哋個工作方面咧體驗到出嚟。所以大家要明白咧，兒童亦都係我哋重要嘅未來主人翁。
Children is our next generation, it's our future, so we do give them the best protection. I'm not going to repeat other points. I think the details are set out in the response paper. All right, I'll give the floor to members. We have 9 members waiting in line. I'd like to discuss with members. We should discuss the next item about the loss of the register of voters. And if we spend too much time on this item, we may not have time for the next item. So how about we give each member 2 minutes first? Well, if each is given 3 minutes, then the item will last till 4, and then we will only have 30 minutes for the next meeting. At best, we could only extend this meeting by 15 minutes because we have the National Anthems Bill at 5 p.m., the same room. So don't waste time. How about 2.5 minutes? I don't want to take time away from you. How about 2.5 minutes? Yes, Chairman. I think there is much more to be decided as far as the arrangement is concerned. This report is very important to Hong Kong. It's very complex. If each member is only given 2.5 minutes, and we also need to give time for the administration to answer. Well, let's not waste time. How about 3 minutes? Let's start now. You say that it's not desirable. I take your suggestion. I don't want to engage in a debate with you. Speaker's not coming through. So what do you want? Mr. Lam Shuk-ting? My suggestion is, how about we just focus on this item today, and then we can call for another meeting as soon as possible about the loss of voter registration of electors. After reading the administration's paper, I have no idea about the cost of the loss. So why don't they spend some more time to find out and explain to us later? Well, we have a dozen members, including you, Mr. Lam Shuk-ting, asking me to discuss this item as soon as possible, and then I just advise you, because of the booking arrangement of the room, another meeting won't be held until end of April. That is why the next item has been squeezed in. It's on members' request. It's not coming from me. And if Mr. Lam Shuk-ting says it's all right, we can discuss the item later, so be it. Dr. Priscilla Leung. In short, I think we should start as quickly as possible. I also wrote in to discuss the next item. So let's see how it goes. We'll do our best to discuss the next item, and we can follow up on it later. So let's begin. 3 minutes, Mr. Alokim. Let me say to the Chief Secretary, I've always been quite blunt. Please, don't go to the United Nations again. It's just a disgrace. About the UPR report 2018, if we compare this with the 2013 report, have you made any progress at all? Not only have you made no progress in terms of a lot of issues such as one country, two systems, we are actually backpedaling. In 2013, concerns were raised. You should follow up on different matters, so on and so forth. And then there was a recommendation that there should be a high-level ministerial department or committee to follow up on the recommendations. You have not done that, and the situation is getting worse. Actually, in the 2013 report, they already told you to review the content of the public order ordinance about public assemblies, and also universal suffrage, elections, another concern. Instead of complying with the basic law after the August 31st NPCSC decision, you went the other way. It's backpedaling, discriminating or elimination of all forms of discrimination. Have you followed up on the matter? Just listen to the deputations. You have done nothing about legislation on anti-discrimination law on sexual orientation. When are you going to do that? What about ethnic minorities and their opportunity to learn Chinese? Well, in the 2013 report, it was already recommended that the non-Chinese speaking ethnic minority should be given equal opportunities to learn Chinese. We have heard so many complaints about that, even as of now. Because of the differential treatment in their opportunities in learning Chinese, it affects their career and education prospects. Well, in 2013, you were not the chief secretary. So be it. In 2018, we have another report. You're again criticized. Shouldn't you follow up on these issues? I think you are such a coward. This is the CRC. Like Mr. Choi Yu-chung just now said, in fact, that Croatia recommends that you enact legislation locally. Instead of following up on the CRC, you are so cowardice that you changed the yellow umbrella into a blue umbrella. If you want the government to give you a response, give them some time. No need. They don't deserve time. Ms. Claudia Mo, spare them from this. No answer needed. Chief Secretary, you always say that you never take time off, you don't take any leave because you're so hardworking. But if it is meaningless work, then what's the point of all that? I think even if you go farming, it will be more meaningful than your current work. Well, I actually feel very resentful about your report. Press freedom in Hong Kong is still intact. Well, how do you explain Victor Mallet's incident? Are we still having an intact system? Freedom of speech? Oh, come on. You are imposing bans on everybody. Freedom of speech is now a concern for those who would like to run in elections. Well, I didn't sit through the whole meeting, but from what I heard, it's shameful. I heard the words uttered, although mounting personal attack isn't good, but this is exactly the criticism about you. I think the public must be very resentful to say that you're shameful. Because the government is telling blatant lies. You are just trying to cheat the foreigners. When it comes to ethnic minorities in Hong Kong, well, actually in the mainland, they have 1 million Xinjiang population of the Hui ethnicity, and they were segregated. They were sent to education camp, and then this matter attracts so much international limelight that ethnic minorities in Hong Kong is ignored. Like some people say, Hong Kong's Disneyland. Hong Kong is Disneyland comparing to Xinjiang in the mainland. And I think that you will be criticized once again because they suggest that Hong Kong's human rights situation is not good, and meanwhile, you're trying to pass this Fugitive Orders Amendment Bill so that fugitives can be extradited to the mainland, which has no rule of law at all. On the one hand, you say we are very competent, we're doing quite well. How are you going to respond to that? Who would like to respond? Well, I demand the CS to respond, please. CS. Thank you, Ms. Mo, for the comment. I must emphasize that we are not out there to mislead the public and the international community. We just want to clarify some misunderstandings so that they have a true picture of Hong Kong. Of course, in other countries, they must understand Hong Kong's true situation. I'm asking about the Fugitives Orders Amendment Bill. Answer, please. We talk about the position of the government regarding this bill. Indeed, we need to fill this legal vacuum. Well, it's a loophole. It's a loophole, right? You put it wrong. Well, we want to uphold the justice. We don't want Hong Kong to be a haven for fugitives. We are responsible for plugging this loophole. What a human recorder. Next, Mr. Lam Chuk Ting. Chairman. About the government's report, it is said that Hong Kong has one country, two systems, and Hong Kong people administers Hong Kong, and we have the basic law as a safeguard for human rights. But according to the International Media Organization, in terms of press freedom, we ranked only the 70th, far lower than other countries. And Victor Mallet's incident, he was refused. He was rejected when he tried to apply for a work permit, and also about human rights and freedom. We again ranked 59th and 110 around the world, and some very explicit criticisms have been made. And about the Fugitive Orders Amendment Bill, many foreign presses and media organizations already criticized Hong Kong government's bill for undermining press freedom in Hong Kong. You don't want Hong Kong to be a haven for fugitives, is that right? CS, how many years have you joined the civil service or the government? Some 40 years, right? So far, there hasn't been any piece of legislation that would allow Hong Kong people to be extradited to the mainland. We haven't had this legislation all these years. Why would you call ourselves a haven? If we have been a haven for fugitives, you would act much sooner. This is not a loophole. Legislators, former legislators, they're all aware of the fact that this is human rights safeguard. Don't give us a blatant lie. Don't continue to hide behind this Taiwanese homicide case. The Taiwanese authorities have made it clear that under the principle of one China, they have a framework agreement, and they are not going to receive the fugitives. Don't continue to lie to the public. Yes, I'd like to respond to the 2 points. First, about press freedom. First, indeed, we do not have any checking of the press because we already have self-checking. Self-censorship. Well, if you look at how local media operates, we have over 70 or 80 media organizations operating in Hong Kong, and they are very active in monitoring the government. According to the Journalists Association, Hong Kong's freedom of the press have all along been undermined. Well, the government does not intervene with the operation of any media organization. Right, what about C.Y. Leung? Next, Dr. Fernando Zhang. Chairman. I think other members have already explained quite clearly that after reunification, human rights in Hong Kong have been undermined, and we are concerned about the Fugitive Orders Amendment Bill. But let's come back to this UPR report. about Hong Kong's human rights situation. I thank deputations for coming here and expressing your concerns. I'd like to, first of all, respond to the UPR coalition. They have a number of suggestions. For example, there should be an advisory structure relating to UPR and comprising members of the community to monitor the SAR government's implementation of the recommendations in this review exercise. In fact, the SAR government has accepted 5 of the recommendations. We need to check the implementation. And about the human rights database, again, this is very important. There should be a method to consolidate all related information of human rights so that we could check the progress and the effectiveness. Other deputations have mentioned the CRC, Convention on the Rights of Children, and we have not had domestic legislation to implement the CRC.
We see that there has been a call for separate legislation to protect children's rights, and we need local legislation to enforce the UN Convention on Children's Rights. Now, other deputations are concerned about ethnic minorities and migrant workers. So the difficulties migrant workers face include if they become pregnant, the needs they require, and Pathfinder has also been serving this community for many years. But some basic services such as education, social welfare, medical services, and even getting a birth certificate is difficult. So we note that ethnic minorities face poverty issues. They are discriminated against. So the Chief Secretary, could you respond to their calls? Well, put simply, we have to thank Mr. Henderson. We do communicate with them. We will maintain communication, and regarding the Chief Secretary leading a delegation to Geneva, in the future I will pay more attention to this work. Now, on the children's rights, I have set up a committee, and a lot of stakeholders, experts, academics are involved. We will try our best to implement the requirements of the convention. So no matter what we do, it has to enhance children's rights. And regarding Pathfinders, we have met, and the Social Welfare Department and Labor Department, together with Pathfinders and other NGOs, will maintain communication. Mr. Chan Ji-chun. So, even though the report in paragraph 100 responds to the needs of sexual minorities in Hong Kong, well, it's still it has not made any progress. In fact, the SAR government position is very clear. Anybody should not be discriminated based on sexual inclination. So in your 2013 report, you also said that there should be they should establish anti-discrimination laws. Now, it's been 5 years. In 2018, the government submitted an audit report, and the wording of anti-discrimination was not mentioned. So, no, whether it is Hong Kong Youth Survey or EOC survey, people support legislation against discrimination based on sexual identity or sexual preference. So you should not talk about the study on discrimination. We don't need discussion. We want action, real results. It is ironic that China, we had recommendations from Chile, for example. They called for legislation to target discrimination and sexual inclination discrimination. Holland, the Netherlands also called for discrimination, legislation against discrimination in the workplace, and China said they accepted. Well, I cannot assume that they were just paying lip service. My reasonable expectation is that they'll take action. So the PRC, even though under one country, two systems, we are highly autonomous, but we're not doing anything. How is that reasonable? Thank you, Mr. Chan. Well, you know that we're not talking about the marriage ordinance. I'm talking about anti-discrimination. You know that we have publicity and education, we have a charter and so on. We want a mutually respectful culture that is non-discriminatory. Well, when will you legislate? That's my question. Do we have to wait for PRC to legislate? Then I'll have to urge them to move faster. Well, this is controversial and complex. We have to be careful, but we want to learn from overseas experience and adopt the most effective method. Thank you, Chairman. I note that France were concerned about our freedom of speech, press freedoms, but when the government responds to these comments and say that Hong Kong has freedom of speech. Now, if we still have legislators who are disqualified because of their comments and people who run in elections and people who lose their jobs in political parties and artists such as Ma Jian who want to hold exhibitions are denied an opportunity, how can you say that we have freedom of speech in Hong Kong and Australia is concerned about one country, two systems, the rule of law, and so on? And in your response, did you mention that there has been NPC interpretation of the law and Hong Kong is being circumscribed by that? NPC interferes with our elections. The China Liaison Office interfere directly. Do you call that effective one country, two systems and a highly autonomous rule? On the rule of law, you say Hong Kong has rule of law, but if you look at our criminal convictions, who is prosecuted, who is not, have the ex-CE been prosecuted based on the UGL incident? And even the Secretary of Justice, they have unauthorized building works. Have they been prosecuted? We had the 9 members of Occupy Central who were charged with archaic offenses. So how can you say Hong Kong has rule of law? So I want to say that when you step into the international arena and respond to international concerns and you say, what do you say? You say it's unnecessary, it's not reasonable, it's they lack an understanding of Hong Kong. So isn't that that's a big lie, right? That's all I want to say is that that's BS. I don't need a response. Ms. Priscilla Leung. Well, we have to thank the deputations for speaking. Just now, one representative questioned the EOC, the achievements and performance in the last 20 plus years. One query was the racial discrimination ordinance, but I think the racial discrimination ordinance wasn't as poor as other situations. Now, I've been following up on the sexual minorities, and I think the EOC are biased. I'd also want to ask the Chief Secretary if a person is appointed as chairman of EOC, that they have a bias that can only support same-sex marriage legislation. Now, in the last 3 years in this venue, I had quoted the so-called surveys from EOC. The reports and Legislative Secretariat reports are very different. The Legislative Secretariat is very neutral. They present both sides of the issue, but EOC, we have discovered that out of tens of thousands of opinions, they say there's only one view because the format is similar. And now the EOC has a new chairman, and the stakeholders have different views. So I want to ask the CS, the EOC, you give them so many resources. So the 4 pieces of legislation should be fine-tuned, including the racial discrimination ordinance. But in the 4 pieces of legislation, they will, before there's a consensus in public on same-sex marriage, but they want to state their position. So do you have a special mandate to the EOC? Then I will question, why do you give the EOC so much resources? Chief Secretary? Undersecretary? Thank you, Chairman. The EOC, of course, is trying to promote equal opportunities, and in the 4 pieces of legislation, they have to promote family status, racial and physical handicap equality. So that is its ambit. Regarding other communities, you haven't answered why is the EOC so biased. For example, the new chairman has openly expressed that they have 2 areas of work. They will work on sexual assault and ethnic minority. Mr. Jiang Chongtai. Well, just now, if the audience has been tuning into this discussion, they will note that they are not sincere. The government has been saying that how they respect the UN conventions. I disagree. He was chosen to speak in the assemblies because he had the lightest workload. I have support for saying so. So before the Geneva meeting, some countries had clearly raised some questions revolving freedom of speech, freedom of the press. They raised specific questions. That is, what work is the SAR undertaking to ensure local and foreign press not being interfered and can continue their work without interference? But the report, in the report, they are just singing the same tune. They are not interfering, but they raised 4 clear questions before the Geneva meeting, including Holland, Germany. They had asked those questions. How did you respond to the Causeway Bay bookstore? How do you respond to Victor Mallet work visa issue? They didn't respond. And they go and talk about One Belt, One Road and the Greater Bay Area. So you weren't responding to questions. You were just trying to sell the OBOR and the GBA. So can Mr. Matthew Cheung respond to local and foreign press? How can the SAR protect local freedom of speech and prevent any interference? Well, the answer is very clear. Freedoms in Hong Kong, not just freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of expression. The public enjoy high autonomy, but as UN conventions, relevant conventions, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, it's not without bounds. If the sovereign country or government needs to maintain social order and security, they can legislate. So that is very clear. So freedom, it's not unbounded freedom. So freedom of the press has not been interfered with. So why do we need to legislate when there's been no interference? They can play their role. That's a fact. So why do we need to dispute this?
Well, that concludes the Q&A session, and I think we should also wrap up the item now. We should move on to the next item. Let me thank everybody for coming. Deputations, individuals. Thank you. Thank you, CS and your team. Next item, loss of register of electors of the registration and electoral office and follow-up measures. And let me invite the administration to come in. Mr. Patrick Nip, Secretary for Constitutional and Mainland Affairs, Ms. Rosanna Law, Deputy Secretary for Constitutional and Mainland Affairs, Mr. Wong Seaman, Chief Electoral Officer, REO, and Mr. Raymond Wong, Principal Electoral Officer, REO. Members, if you'd like to ask questions, please indicate, and the Madam Clerk, after jotting down your names, will pass it to me. I'll read out your names. Welcome, Secretary and your team. Members who would like to ask questions, let me read out the names: Mr. Alvin Young, Mr. Lam Chuk Ting, Mr. Roy Kwong, Dr. Chen Chung Tai, Ms. Alice Mack, Mr. Michael Luk, Mr. Lau Yip Keung, and also Dr. Priscilla Leung and Mr. Charles Mock. I'm very fair to avoid suspicion. I just asked Madam Clerk to jot down the names for me. 9 members. Secretary, would you like to briefly walk us through the paper, please? Chairman, members. First of all, I thank Chairman for including this item for discussion today. And this is done on many members' requests. They would like to have a discussion as soon as possible, so that after Tuesday last week, when I gave an account to the media, and also another opportunity at the Special Finance Committee meeting when I explained the matter to members, I am now given this opportunity to tell you the up-to-date situation. Now, Register of Electors contains personal data of electors. The government attaches great importance to the issue. Over the past week, the REO already followed up on the matter in a number of ways. For example, they reported the matter to the police and also to the PCPD. As I understand, the police and the Office of the Privacy Commissioner for Personal Data, PCPD, have already begun an investigation. The REO is cooperating fully. At the same time, the REO already issued letters to 8,136 electors reminding them of the possible risks. And for government departments and organizations which often deal with personal data, we have issued letters appealing to their assistance to prevent identity theft and to protect the electors. The REO has also completed reviewing the voter registration information of all the electors on that register, including new registrations since 2016, and to check for an abnormality. Since 2016, there's been altogether some 400 applications for change of address. The number is by and large in line with the general statistics. No abnormality has been detected. The REO has been contacting electors to verify their registration information, and we have been able to contact some electors and will continue to contact the rest. We understand the public's concern over the matter. We will carefully follow up on the matter and in a serious manner. The EAC will also conduct a comprehensive investigation to see if there is any deliberate concealment of fact or human errors, and will also review the established mechanism of the EAC and make improvements to the electoral procedures. Once the EAC completes its work, we will definitely report back to members. Chairman, I understand that you may have a lot of questions about the incident. I ask for members' understanding as well as the public's understanding. Before the investigation is completed, we cannot draw prematurely any conclusion based on the information we have at hand at this moment. And we must not disclose details that may affect the investigation. So I thank members and we'll be happy to take questions from members. All right, I'll open the floor for members. 3 minutes each. Mr. Alvin Young. Thank you, Chairman. I need to ask about the procedure. Paragraph 4 mentions that the law enforcement agency requested to make available the registers of electors in September 2016. The REO, however, had been unable to retrieve the register. So which law enforcement agency is this referring to? ICAC, police? Secretary, ICAC, to my understanding. So in other words, 2.5 years ago, the ICAC already requested to check the register, which has been lost. The REO had not been able to furnish the register. So, Chairman, in the past 2.5 years, is it that the REO had all along kept silent? Or is it that the REO already explained to the ICAC, but that is a law enforcement agency, but then the matter only came to light until now? Secretary. About the detailed arrangements of the law enforcement agency, we may not be in a position to divulge the details, but I would defer to my colleague to elaborate on the matter. I understand that the inquiry took some time. Mr. Wang Ximan, Chief Electoral Officer. After Electoral's general election 2016, indeed the ICAC approached us requesting to make available the register of electors. Well, that is the majority of registers of electors. When the ICAC approached us, it was not a one-off exercise. In fact, the whole exercise spanned a long time, and the ICAC contacted us on a number of occasions for the registers. Based on their requests, our colleagues retrieved registers. We were able to retrieve some, and we continued to try to locate others. As for the register which has not been found and not reported, this will also be our focus of investigation. Chairman, can I invite the administration or the REO to confirm this? Is it that there is only one copy of the register of elector in September 2016 which has been lost, or are there any other registers which could be lost but not yet confirmed? I'll ask the Chief Electoral Officer to confirm then whether this is the only register lost. Yes, I confirm that one register of electors cannot be found. Does it mean that what Mr. Wong's saying is that other registers of electors are properly kept by the government? I just want to confirm this. Yes. All right, Chairman. Then I have a question for the Secretary. Can the government guarantee that there will never be any loss of register of electors again under the charge of the Hong Kong SAR government? Well, to our level best, we will try to make sure that this incident will not be repeated. However, incidents do happen, sometimes beyond our control, so I cannot guarantee 100%. The most important thing is that we have introduced proper safeguards to try our best to prevent a repeat. Mr. Lam Cheuk Ting. In October 2016, when the ICAC requested the production of the register of the elector of that constituency, you have not been able to locate the register until now. So after the problem was revealed in October 2016, up to what level of officers in the REO received a report that the register had gone missing? Who was the most senior officer? Well, I think for details of the incident, we should await the investigation results. The REO may have some information. The REO may have made some inquiries. But since the details are not confirmed, I can only invite the CEO to give you a reply on this basis. Like the Secretary mentioned, I'm now able to get hold of some information after 2 weeks investigation as to exactly what level of officers are involved. Since we are conducting a full-scale investigation, we should wait until the investigation is completed before we confirm the details. Chairman, Mr. Wong, you are the highest level of officer in the REO, Chief Electoral Officer. Can you confirm, as the person in charge, that you personally only knew about the loss of the register recently, in early April? Chairman, like I said in the press conference last Tuesday, in early April, I personally came into knowledge that one register of electors could be lost. Chairman, we strongly question this point. I think the public does as well, because you need to explain to the ICAC what papers are missing. A register of electors contains a lot of personal particulars and sensitive information about electors. It is such a major incident. Why would a senior officer only relate that to the ICAC but not to his superior? Not to mention that under the PDPO, Personal Data Privacy Ordinance, you are required to report this privacy leak to the PCPD. So aren't you suspicious that somebody, and don't you suspect that somebody could be concealing this within the REO? Secretary, I agree with Mr. Lam Cheuk Ting that in the investigation process, if there is deliberate cover-up of the incident, this will definitely be looked into during investigation. And if this is substantiated, it will be dealt with according to the discipline mechanism. Mr. Roy Kwong. Chairman, this is not the first time that the electors' personal data have been lost. This is outrageous. We have no idea when it first went missing, where or how it went missing. What we know is that the personal data of 8,000 electors contain sensitive information. And the government seems to have no idea at all. So can you just say sorry and end the matter like this? I'd like to have an update first. Secretary. As I mentioned in my opening remarks, I already explained our follow-up action. First, we find it really regrettable that this happened. Of course, we apologize and we need to take follow-up action after the incident happened. Well, you need to report the matter to the police, and the Office of the PCPD, the Privacy Commissioner, is conducting an investigation. The REO is being fully cooperative in the process. At the same time, the REO already issued letters to all affected electors. We've also issued letters to departments and organizations which usually handle personal data, informing them of the incident. And since 2016, we also reviewed the change of address application since 2016, and we received some 400 applications. It is not really irregular. The proportion is all right.
So the Electoral Office has contacted the voters to see if they have checked, to see if they have amended their information. They also contacted some voters. They will do follow-up work. So the Electoral Office, the CMAB and the Electoral Office will submit a report. The Electoral Office will also conduct an investigation. Well, the 2 laptops are still missing, so puts simply involving the police isn't helpful. So have you notified half of the voters? I need to clarify, Chairman. The 8,000 voters have received letters, and I'm referring to 400 voters where their information has changed. They will be contacted to ensure that they really amended their information. Mr. Chen Chung-hai. Well, first of all, this incident will compromise the 8,000 voters' privacy. It also affects our voting regime. The incident occurred in October 2016 because the ICAC had to investigate, and that led to this incident being disclosed. So if we didn't have a law enforcement agency investigate, then we wouldn't know that this information was missing. So if we didn't have a law enforcement agency looking into it, would you still be ignorant? Well, first of all, I cannot speculate what the situation how it would develop. It's a fact that a law enforcement agency raised this question, and they found that one voter register was missing. That's how it happened. Well, we understand. In September, we'll have LegCo elections, and the incident was raised in October. But then the poll was closed, and 2 years down the road, you discover it's missing. So the question is, the poll station monitoring is lacking, and I also want to ask, according to LegCo rules, Rule 59, the Electoral Office, if the officer disregards his responsibility, it is a breach, but they are susceptible to a level 2 penalty. But this charge has to be raised within 3 months of the offense date, otherwise they cannot be prosecuted. So when this incident occurred It was discovered in October. Then, according to ROP Article 59, this electoral officer could have been prosecuted, and now he is scot-free. So, Secretary, do you agree that somebody has evaded criminal liability? Well, Mr. Cheng's question, first of all, after the election was concluded, when all the information was collected, there was a collection of the votes, the poll, and there was a centralized storage. So when you say whether the electoral officer has a responsibility and whether there was a breach of law, then it would depend on where the problem occurred, where a mistake was made. So you cannot say, therefore, the criminal, the officer has committed an offense. So it's not an administrative issue. It could be a criminal incident. Ms. Makmakin, on the election day in 2016, this poll station, did voters realize that their name was struck off the list and they had to report to the police? I don't have that information right now. Well, if it's surprising when you say that you don't have the information, because you lost some 8,000 voter information. So our neighborhood were very shocked. One person told me that that afternoon when he went to vote, the person in the adjacent queue, when they took out their ID, they were told that they had already voted and their name was struck off the list, and the police were notified. If you don't have this information, that's ridiculous. You don't know what's going on at the poll station. And second, when did you contact the people in the poll station? I asked the Gaifang, and they said that everything was signed and sealed. The police had stored everything, and just now Mr. Wong said that this occurred only in one poll station, and I don't think it was lost, it was stolen. So out of the few hundred polling stations in Hong Kong, have you checked and found that all the register in all the poll stations? Otherwise, when the ICAC had looked into the few dozen poll stations, what about the other poll stations? Is it in your register, in your warehouse? Has it been destroyed, Mr. Wong? I can confirm that one register is missing. The other voter registers from the other polling stations, it's in our electoral office. All of the registers are in the electoral office. At this point, the voter registers have not been destroyed. Well, then could you respond to the questions I asked just now? So what happened at the polling station? Did you ask the people in the polling station why this is missing? Well, do you know that 8,000 voter information is lost? People are unhappy. Their addresses, ID is lost. So what are you going to do about it? I understand the voters affected, of course, are unhappy. I'm conducting the investigation and I'm following up on the deficiencies. We will remedy our deficiencies, Mr. Lau Yukang. So this is not the first time. After the CE election in 2017, 2 notebook computers were lost in AWE, 1,200 voters' information, and 3 million voters' information is how was lost. So it's good that they've come out clean? How have they been? Had they been concealing the affairs, that would have been worse. I'm concerned about the follow-up measures at the end of the year, and next September we have LegCo and district council elections. So what measures do you have to prevent personal information being lost? Well, our follow-up measures, aside from notifying the affected voters, the Electoral Office will submit a detailed report to the Bureau, and the Registration and Electoral Office, so we will investigate and try to identify the reasons for the incident. There are a lot of questions that need to be answered. So the incident illustrates whether we have problems in the administration, the execution, or implementation, and does it involve deliberate concealment? All this will help us improve our deficiencies and avoid the future occurrence of similar incidents. Now, we have upcoming district council and LegCo elections next year. So if we identify improvement measures that can be handled in the short term, of course we will undertake these measures. If we need changes to the system, we will tackle that as soon as possible. So that is the work ahead of us. There are a lot of questions that cannot be answered right now. Mr. Wong, the CEO, cannot disclose any further information, and I hope you can understand. Mr. Luk Jong-ho. Well, when the ICAC investigated the voter registration, did they have a specific goal, or was it just a random inspection? And when they found that the voter register was lost, and now April, the CEO was made aware of the incident. So we know that there are many steps in the bureaucracy, so the civil servants in each step, can the government disclose when did each level of bureaucracy become notified? Could you give us a timeline? And third, the information that is lost is very sensitive because it has resident's full name, address, ID number. People can use this to apply for loans, or even passwords can be hacked. So if that leads to economic loss, how can we assist the affected people? Will there be compensation, or what kind of relevant compensation do you have in mind? Well, just now Mr. Luk talked about some specifics. Let's see what Mr. Wong can say about that. Well, just now Mr. Luk asked, was it a random check by ICAC, or did they have a goal in mind? I can say that ICAC, when they asked for a voter register, it wasn't a random check. They asked for specific voter information. And second, the whole process, how many levels of bureaucracy were involved, and how much time did each level take. I said just now, because of our upcoming work, we will conduct a detailed investigation, and how much time did each level take to report or not report? We have to wait for the investigation before we can confirm this information. Well, Mr. Look also said because of loss of information, it might lead to economic loss. So it would have to depend on the actual situation. Ms. Priscilla Leung. Why don't we have reprimands? It's because time's not up now. Time's up now. Typically, because of human error, systemic error, that leads to extraordinary loss. There are some unknown factors at play. So I have reasonable doubt that in 2017, we lost 3 million registered voters' information, and on this occasion it's even worse. We have a postponed discovery, a postponed revelation. Do we have undercover criminal organizations? Well, undercover criminals. Well, we can have industrial espionage. On this occasion, it's taken so long. There must be human factors at play. That was within the government. There are some people who have deliberately postponed reporting. So under these circumstances, no matter how you whitewash the incident, you cannot restore the public's confidence.
Unless you do a complete overhaul and design a fresh system with new faces. I don't know what personnel will be involved, but mostly tech-savvy staff and those who are familiar with the system. So, Secretary, according to you, you're waiting for the report. That means you're holding hostage to fortune. I want to know what your design is. It should not be crude, because the public would not accept minor improvements. You need to have an overhaul, because we are not confident about your system. Well, let me just declare that the meeting will be extended by 15 minutes. First, we are in the process of investigation. We would like to find out the ins and outs of the matter as well. We then need to identify the problems before we make improvements and follow up on the matter. So can we just bring new faces to replace everyone? In fact, during every election, we engage temporary staff. So we need to review the mechanism, of course. We also need to find if human errors are involved, whether there is any deliberate cover-up. We need to find out the cause of the incident before we make improvements. Well, don't do it in a perfunctory manner. No, we do it in a serious manner. We really need to identify the problem in order to have a solution. Mr. Charles Mock. According to media reports, this incident is revealed because of ICAC's investigation and about the suspected vote rigging incident for the IT constituency. I am also a member of the sector, so I'm very concerned about it. You said that this is the only register which has been found lost. Other registers can be found. If that is the case, it's really such a coincidence. There are several thousand or close to 10,000 registers of electors in Hong Kong. And this is the only register being lost, and this is under the ICAC's investigation by coincidence. Response, CEO, about the ballot papers. I mean, the form for counting the materials not lost, right? There was a question just now on whether it was just a random inspection on the part of the ICAC. I didn't quite catch your answer. It wasn't a random inspection. I take it that the ICAC specifically requested this register, and I think the ICAC requested many registers, only that this register happened to be lost. That's right. That's right. The ICAC requested to make available more than just this register. In fact, they requested to make available the majority of registers of electors. All right, so this is the only register missing. In 2016, in October, the ICAC made this request for information. And then the ICAC made the rest in April 2017. We're now in April 2019. It's been 2.5 years since October 2016. And nobody knows when the register first went missing, and it's been 2.5 years. Have you had any idea about this? Let me briefly say that the ICAC did not make a single request in one go for the majority of registers. The requests were made a number of times, and we continued to locate different registers, and in the end, this register was found to be missing. All right, so there were registers that took a long time before they could be identified. That means you have a very big problem with your management system. Another question. So you have the EAC's report or the REO's report, or is it that there will be a report, a joint report, and when will the report be available, Secretary? The REO will submit a report to the EAC as well as our Bureau. And the EAC, after receiving the REO's report, will conduct its own investigation. In the end, the EAC will also submit an investigation report. Will the reports be made available to the public when the reports are ready? Definitely. Mr. Christopher Zhang. Thank you, Chairman. About the loss of register of electors, the incident has exposed a lot of problems with our system. Well, this is not as huge as 2 laptop computers. It is impossible not to find out the cause of the incident and who should be held liable. I mean, if the investigation shows that human error is involved or that there is deliberate cover-up, so what should be the established discipline mechanism? Will the staff member concerned be penalized? Or is it like the old saying goes that civil servants' jobs are really secure and there is no accountability? Because the incident involves loss of electors' data. If another similar incident happens in the future, what will the Bureau do? Will you take a 3-step process? You will apologize, review, and promise to make improvements, and then end the matter like this? Secretary. Chairman, Mr. Zhang would like us to make investigation and find out the cause and see if human error is involved and whether there is any deliberate cover-up. Of course, this must be assessed according to the facts available, and we need to follow the civil services discipline mechanism, meaning that the Civil Service Bureau will instigate the proceedings based on the evidence and facts as revealed, the offense involved in metering out punishment. So we have an established mechanism for that. Second, we definitely don't want a repeat of this incident, and we'll do our best and endeavor in preventing this from happening again. That is why, through investigation, we would like to find out the cause and also identify our inadequacies. Whether somebody deliberately failed to report the loss, or whether there is any management issue, and whether there is any systemic flaw. We will work on all these fronts, and then we will follow up on these matters in a serious manner. It is not the case that we want to just let things go. Not that easy. Mr. Lee. Chairman, this is a very serious matter, and it also affects the public's confidence in the REO. Indeed, the REO has the data of all voters. You need to be very careful about it. Earlier, you already lost 2 computers with personal data. On this occasion, again, you caused a leak of the electors' personal data. I think you should deeply reflect on yourselves and see whether this is a systemic problem or whether this is a human error. I know you are conducting an investigation. Well, in fact, all legislators are involved. I sometimes would set up street stalls to help voters register. So I'm helping you out as well. After this incident, have you reviewed your workflow and see how you can salvage public confidence so that the public would feel safe giving their personal data to your keeping? I am concerned because every day you receive application forms by different means, fax even, and are you complying strictly with the PDPO? Because otherwise the public would be very concerned. Let me just first respond and I'll see if the REO has a supplement. Ms. Lee is right. Indeed, the REO has in its hand the personal data of electors. So the REO staff should be very sensitive in handling the personal data. We'll continue to remind our staff, and they should have this awareness. I also request the REO to review its work and see how they can make immediate improvements to prevent the risk of a repeat of this incident. So it's about how data should be handled after its collection. I understand that there is a mechanism. Mr. Wong, CEO. About the internal handling of personal data within the REO, there is a mechanism, especially after the CE election in 2017 when 2 laptop computers were lost. We updated the guidelines on handling and use and storage of personal data in elections. Of course, on a regular basis, we update the guidelines. Of course, you have guidelines, but you still have a blunder. Have you tested the guidelines to see if they're robust? Otherwise, why will I have confidence in you? Because despite the guidelines, you already have 2 incidents. Chairman, of course, I agree that guidelines are important, but it is equally important that the guidelines are properly implemented. That is why training and education would be necessary. We need to remind our staff, and in the near future, the REO is going to follow up on these matters to make improvements. We have 2 more members, Dr. Helena Wong and Ms. Alice Mack. We need members' consent to extend the meeting by another 15 minutes. No objection? All right, it will be extended by another 15 minutes. Dr. Helena Wong. Thank you, Chairman. On 2 occasions, the REO caused a leak of personal data. The first was when 2 laptop computers were lost containing personal data of electors. Second, the register of electors is lost on this occasion. Had it not been Mr. Chow Smok or somebody else made a complaint to the ICAC about vote rigging, this incident would not have been exposed. That means we will never find out that a register has been lost. So for other constituencies where there is no complaint, can you confirm whether you have counted and verified that all registers are present? Now, we already identify a loophole. Can you ensure in the future operations of the REO there will not be a repeat? Unfortunately, the REO has repeatedly encountered such problems, and we are concerned whether we have a snitch inside, somebody causing trouble, stealing things within the office. If it is done by a member of your own, then it is even more serious. I think criminal investigation is necessary. You must find the culprit.
Otherwise, these incidents will reoccur. So in the next legislative election, we need to have pre-elections. So once again, the Democratic Party objects to the experiment, that is to have election staff 7 days before the election day going to some polling stations to vote. And when these votes are collected, they have to be stored and will be counted after the election day. So within those 7 days, where do you store these votes? Will we have another undercover agent sabotaging the election? Because that might give a reason for re-vote, especially since we don't know what happened and how we don't know how to prevent these incidents. Is it that we have a mole inside the organization, or when these incidents occur and you conduct experiments, I think the risk is not worth the results. Well, just now Mr. Wong confirmed in the 2016 elections the one voter register was lost. The other registered are still safely stored in the electoral office. Now, regarding the suggestion to do a pre-vote, when we discuss with legislators, this is a suggestion in expanding the voter base. We had discussed this, and Ms. Wong had expressed your views. So we will follow up members' views before making a decision. We still have 2 members in the second round. Does anybody else wish to speak? Or we'll have to draw the line. Mak-May-Kun. I agree with Ms. Priscilla Leung. Do we really have a mole in the electoral office? Last time we lost a notebook. They know how to avoid detection, and on this occasion it's the same with the voter register. They know that if there wasn't an investigation, nobody would have known it was missing. So what's going on in the electoral office? The secretary, you need to have an in-depth investigation. People people can do whatever they wish. And you said that you were checking on whether the voter information has been amended. Have you concluded this investigation? Who's been doing the investigation? You might lose more information during the auditing. I'll take the first question. Regarding speculations and assumptions, so we would like to identify the reasons. So if you're talking about voter register and other resources, during the whole transportation process, we need to ensure that where the material is at each step, and we can prevent future loss. We need to examine whether it is sufficient and whether we can improve. In the last few days, regarding the voter information, whether it has been amended, there is not a lot of discrepancy compared to territory-wide figures. There's regarding the 400 voters, we have attempted to contact them, and up till now, the 400-odd voters, we were able to contact 300 plus. We need to confirm in the last few years if they had submitted a change of address. We want to confirm, have they registered? We also want to confirm the validity of their voter registration. Well, with the remaining dozens of voters, we're still trying to contact them. You cannot. First of all, our voters are afraid of their information leaked. Second, they are afraid have people's registration been amended, the address has been changed. And third, people are afraid whether their voter status has been repealed, because the affected people keep asking us, do they need to re-register their voter status? So could you need to give clear explanations. Ms. Priscilla Leung, I had mentioned the system in 2015-16. Voters should have voted in Whampoa East, and they said that they were told to vote in Hoi Som, but they had not changed their address. I had asked this question and not received an acceptable answer. So you need to tackle this problem head on. You need to investigate. You have to confirm the technical aspects of the workflow, even if it might be human error, but I suspect it's not that simple. Administratively, as I said on the last occasion, the voting district has changed, but there's no follow-up. Well, if you're fortunate, you can see who's broken the law or made a mistake. If you're lucky, you can identify where the error occurred. If you come up empty-handed, you can only deal with it administratively. You need to redeploy the whole team. Your team should not be dealing with this sensitive information. And politically, you need to make a change. If voter information is not handled properly, you will not be able to restore the public's confidence. I have heard your comments. I will investigate thoroughly and put forward remedial measures, including, is it because of error in execution, we will have to look into it. We have to see whether our guidelines are sufficient, and we also need to deploy technology to avoid these issues, and we also have to see whether the Electoral Office can meet these demands. So we can implement short, medium-term measures. Some measures might take time. We need LegCo support. For example, I saw that the Electoral Office, the Chief Electoral Office post was had a time constraint. It was a supernumerary post. So how could they follow up if the person was being deployed? Well, that concludes our discussion. We have to thank the Secretary and officials. Any other business? If we don't have AOB, we adjourn the meeting.